This is a video about Gloria Ladson Billings, who is a remarkable woman. She is a force in the field of education. She has made many valuable contributions to the field, but her main contribution is significant and incredibly impactful. Ladson Billings' culturally relevant pedagogy has created ripples throughout education since its inception in the 1990s. From her modest roots to an impressive career, Gloria Ladson Billings has dedicated her life to improving the lives and education of African American children. She engrossed me from the first paper I read. I found I lost hours poring over her writings, including her award-winning book, The Dream Keepers, which I devoured in a matter of days. I decided to create this project on the life of Gloria Ladson Billings because of the inspiration I feel from her thoughtful analysis and storytelling. During this video, I will discuss where she came from, the beginning of her career and the subsequent positions of authority, the theorists who influenced her work, as well as the many themes and ideas she espouses in her writings and their significance to the field of education. I will conclude with remarks about how she impacted me and my teaching. GLB, as her students affectionately refer to her, grew up poor in West Philadelphia. She was born in 1947 while Jim Crow was still in full swing in the South. Her mother had received a high school diploma while her father only completed the 3rd grade. Therefore, education was of heightened importance in her household. She credits her tenacity and the focused direction in her life to her parents and grandparents who nurtured her social and educational capabilities. The family was 4 generations removed from slavery and only 2 from Jim Crow. Racism in the country had a direct impact on the family. Her family had to sit on the backs of buses and make sure they were out of certain areas before dark. Gloria remembers having the feeling that her middle school teachers did not think she was very smart, even though she earned straight A's. Despite dealing with these hardships, she was resilient. According to Ladson Billings, she remembers every teacher she ever had, the good, bad, and the racist. Fortunately, she had many strong teachers who had a positive impact on her life. Her schooling sparked her interest in education, although she would not discover the educator within her for years to come. Ladson Billings obtained her bachelor's in education from Morgan State University in 1968, making her the first in her family to go to college. She went on to earn her master's in curriculum and instruction from the University of Washington in 1972. She taught for a decade in Philadelphia schools, as well in California for several years. This is where she first noted that the outcomes of African American children in school did not make sense. The seeds of her future research were planted during these years as a teacher. She returned to school and earned her PhD from Stanford in 1984. She notes that even in her doctoral studies, she experienced racism. She tells the story of walking into school to find the halls empty. When she inquired as to where everyone was, she discovered they had all gone to AERA, the American Educational Research Association. She had been excluded from this knowledge. Despite all the setbacks, GLB remained resilient. Years later, she would be elected president of the AERA. From Stanford, she went on to become one of the most respected and admired voices in education in the country and beyond. The career of Gloria Ladson Billings is extraordinary. After receiving her PhD from Stanford, Ladson Billings worked as an assistant professor at Santa Clara University. In 1991, she moved back across the country and began work and research at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is where she retired from many years later. She spent her years at the University of Wisconsin as a teacher, educator, and researcher. During her tenure, she published many journal articles along with numerous books. She served as the editor for the American Educational Research Journal and was a member of various editorial boards. She has also been highly decorated with awards and accolades for her service to the field of education. In 2004, GLB was bestowed the George and Louis Spindler Award from the Council on Education and Anthropology. She was named an Outstanding Woman of Color Award at UW-Madison in 2006 and was given the Hildell Award for Distinguished Professional Accomplishment at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in April 2008. These 3 awards only scratch the surface of all Ladson Billings accolades. Furthermore, she holds honorary doctorate degrees from Umeå University in Sweden, the University of Massachusetts Lowell, the University of Alicante in Spain, the Erickson Institute in Chicago, and Morgan State University in Baltimore. Gloria Ladson Billings worked on the faculty at UW-Madison for over 26 years, and in that time she accomplished what most only dream of. She published the groundbreaking book Dream Keepers in 1994 and followed that with the publication of Crossing Over to Canaan in 2001. Some of her other books include Beyond the Big House, published in 2005, and Critical Race Theory in Education, published in 2021. In addition to her books, Ladson Billings has published dozens of peer-reviewed articles and given many speeches. Her ideas have had and continue to have a big impact on education. There have been many theorists that have influenced Ladson Billings, and they all impacted her in different ways. Giraud, Haberman, and Schulman are cited often in her work. She has also been influenced in her later work by Paris and Elam and their work on culturally sustaining pedagogy. E.G. Cohen, a former professor of Ladson Billings, and W.E.B. Du Bois have also had an impact on her work. In this section of the video, I will discuss some of the different influences and the ways in which they impacted Ladson Billings. Henry Giraud and Lee Schulman are quoted quite often in the work of Ladson Billings. Giraud is known for his development of a pedagogy for the underclass, which falls in lockstep with the theories of Ladson Billings. Schulman, on the other hand, offered a useful rubric for understanding aspects of pedagogy. In her article, Culturally Relevant Pedagogy 2.0, aka the Remix, Ladson Billings uses the work of both Giraud and Schulman to illustrate a point that radically different conceptions of pedagogy represent the continuum along which the work of culturally relevant pedagogy and this new work on culturally sustaining pedagogy must operate. While these two theorists offer vastly different perceptions on pedagogy, they both are useful theories in which to build upon to become culturally relevant. Giraud is seen in other places in the work of Ladson Billings. For example, in her award-winning book, The Dream Keepers, Ladson Billings uses the work of Giraud, as well as other theorists, to discuss the potential reasons for African American struggles in education. According to Ladson Billings, the reason minority students don't do well in school is a result of societal conflict and a struggle for power, which is in line with the theories Giraud proposes about pedagogy. Another example of Ladson Billings drawing on the work of Giraud is also found in the book The Dream Keepers, in which she aligns herself with Giraud's theories on the purpose of pedagogy. Ladson Billings quotes Giraud and Simon directly to illustrate that it is the way we teach that profoundly affects the way that students perceive the content of the curriculum. This is the idea that pedagogy directly influences what knowledge is conveyed and what identities are produced based on social relations, which is a foundation on which culturally relevant pedagogy is based. Schulman also appears in The Dream Keepers a few times to help Ladson Billings illustrate her points. For example, she makes the case that teachers should be, in their hearts, intellectuals and have a desire for learning and rigor. They should be passionate about knowledge. She uses a direct quote from Schulman in which he lays out the level of understanding teachers must have of the content to prove her point that a search for important ideas and the construction of knowledge fuels the excitement and enthusiasm that exemplify culturally relevant teaching. Schulman's influence is not only seen in her book, but also in her articles. In Teaching in Dangerous Times, Culturally Relevant Approaches to Teacher Assessment, Ladson Billings uses the words of Schulman to discuss the nature of teacher assessment and the downfalls that go along with it. It is difficult to create teacher assessments, and an assessment which is culturally relevant is yet to exist. Schulman has asserted that using teaching situations is a way to appropriately assess what teachers know and are able to do. For example, providing teachers with scenarios in which they must reflect and determine the appropriate course of action is one way to assess teachers in a culturally relevant manner. According to Ladson Billings, Schulman asserts that case methodology provides a way to codify the knowledge base of teaching. Ladson Billings contends that this would be one method that would fairly assess teachers. Another influence on the work of Ladson Billings comes from Martin Haberman, who is known for his work on the concept of a pedagogy of poverty. This idea lays out the ways in which children in urban environments are being educated, which is primarily teacher-directed and has very little student engagement. One can see why this theory would be of interest to Ladson Billings and her work on culturally relevant pedagogy. In her article, Pushing Past the Achievement Gap, an essay on the language of deficit, Ladson Billings attempts to dispel myths about the education of African American students, one of which is the culture of poverty. Ladson Billings argues that poverty is not a culture, and instead we should be looking at how these children are being educated. She uses Haberman's pedagogy of poverty to illustrate why these kids seem to remain in the vicious cycle of poverty. They are not being educated in the same ways that white middle-class children are educated, which is keeping them in this cyclical pattern. One other influence which deserves an honorable mention is E.G. Cohen. Elizabeth Cohen is a former professor of sociology at Stanford who taught Ladson Billings in her doctoral program. She is known for her work on cooperative learning, which is a theory that came from the idea that certain groups of people are at a disadvantage simply because of who they are, due to characteristics such as race, gender, social status, etc. Cooperative learning is the result of Cohen's attempt at status equalization, which would attempt to level the playing field through cooperative learning. This is an example of culturally relevant teaching, but Ladson Billings also uses this example to show how ideas with the best intentions can be misused and misinterpreted by the public. Cooperative learning has become a catchphrase for an element added to instruction, which was not the initial idea. Ladson Billings notes that this is also the case with culturally relevant pedagogy, as it has taken on a life of its own since its inception and is not always used in the way she had imagined. According to Ladson Billings, once you place an idea into the marketplace of ideas, consumers of your ideas feel free to use or abuse your ideas as they see fit. There have been many influences on Ladson Billings and her work, and they've all impacted her differently. I could make this entire video about the influences on Ladson Billings and on those she has influenced with her work. However, the influence she has had on many theorists comes from her many recurring themes, which we will discuss now. There are many recurring themes and topics throughout the work of Gloria Ladson Billings. However, for the purpose of this video, I have decided to focus on 3 themes that have stood out to me. First and foremost, I must highlight culturally relevant pedagogy, as this is the life work of Gloria Ladson Billings. From her first original study to the theories of today, culturally relevant pedagogy has transformed education. Secondly, I will focus on her concept of the education debt, which has been amassed at the expense of African American people for centuries. According to Ladson Billings, when I argue that what we really have is an education debt, I am speaking of the historical, economic, socio-political, and moral components of inequality that shape the contours of this nation. Lastly, I want to discuss her ideas about a hard reset that is needed after the pandemic, which is what Ladson Billings describes as what needs to happen to reclaim and preserve our culture through our school students. These 3 concepts shape the dialogue she engages in with the educational community and the impact she has had on education worldwide. Culturally relevant pedagogy is a complex and well-thought-out theory about the appropriate ways to educate all children, but especially minority children. Ladson Billings asserts that one must truly know their students to be able to teach them. This includes their culture, community, language, traditions, values, beliefs, and familiar structure. It is about the kind of teaching that helps students choose academic success. As a young teacher, Gloria Ladson Billings noticed something that distressed her. African American children were not flourishing in schools the way white children were, and she wondered why. The research clearly shows that Black and brown children have lower reading levels, higher dropout rates, higher rates of suspension and disciplinary problems, and they are more likely to be identified as special education students. Ladson Billings wondered what was getting in the way of these students' success. She decided to reframe the question. Scholars, teachers, and administrators regularly asked, "What is wrong with these children?" As Ladson Billings states, instead of asking what was wrong with African American learners, I dared to ask what was right with these students and what happened in the classrooms of teachers who seemed to experience pedagogical success with them. Through her tireless efforts, she discovered many answers to her inquiry. Culturally relevant pedagogy was the product of an extended study conducted over a 2-year period. Ladson Billings decided she wanted to see what works in the education of African American students, and she concluded that the best judges of this were the parents. Therefore, she sought out the parents in a small urban community in California called Pinewood. The parents did not disappoint, and they provided a list of teachers who experienced success in educating their children. She then went on to schools to cross-reference the list with school principals. When finished, she had a list of 9 teachers, 8 of whom agreed to participate in the study. The setting of this study, conducted in the late 1980s and early 1990s, is an important factor. I will be describing Pinewood as it was described in Dreamkeepers, Ladson Billings' award-winning book, so it is important to remember that 30 years have passed since then. Pinewood is a town that has experienced many trials and tribulations. In a nutshell, Pinewood is a poor, primarily African-American community surrounded by more affluent white communities. The school system has been plagued with high turnover rates at the highest levels. The town suffers from a high crime rate, particularly due to crack cocaine. According to Ladson Billings, the problems cited by the local newspaper included low test scores, a high senior high school dropout rate among the district's 8th grade graduates, high turnover in personnel, and a grand jury investigation into the management of district funds. Many of the middle-class families had left the district for better schools. It is abundantly apparent that the children of Pinewood needed strong, committed teachers to have a chance to shine. Over the years of the study, Ladson Billings met with the 8 teachers regularly, observed them teaching, and held group meetings where they could debrief and discuss what was working and what was not. Through this research, she observed 8 very different but equally skilled teachers who all demonstrated success in the education of their Black and brown students. While the styles differed, their level of care and commitment to their students did not. Ladson Billings was able to observe many qualities which led to her creation of culturally relevant pedagogy. In Dreamkeepers, Ladson Billings is able to weave theory into narrative storytelling to expertly illustrate the characteristics of culturally relevant pedagogy. While there are many aspects to culturally relevant pedagogy, it has 3 main tenets: academic success, cultural competence, and socio-political consciousness. Academic success measures what students should know and be able to do. Culturally relevant teachers are able to move their students academically and do it well. According to Ladson Billings, culturally relevant teachers are capable of assessing what students know soon after they arrive in their classrooms and can provide evidence of what they know and are able to do at any point in the school year. Academic success is the bottom line, the skill teachers must have to be able to call oneself successful in education, which is why it is one of the 3 pillars to CRP. However, academic success alone does not create a culturally relevant teacher. Cultural competence is another primary aspect of culturally relevant pedagogy. Culturally relevant teachers must not only understand culture, but they must also understand how to incorporate it into the classroom curriculum. Teachers need to be familiar with the cultures of their students. As Ladson Billings states, culturally relevant teachers understand that we exist in a complex, diverse, globally connected world, and that the world their students will enter as adults will be even more so. Thus, culturally relevant teachers seek out knowledge about the culture of their students and successfully embed it into the culture of the classroom. The final primary tenet of CRP is sociopolitical consciousness, which is the knowledge of issues impacting students from society and the ability to use those issues in the classroom. These teachers are able to problematize the issues for students and thus allow them to offer solutions. This is the ability to get students to be able to think critically about social and political issues in their community that directly impact them and empower them to come up with answers or solutions to the problems. As Ladson Billings states, helping students make sense of these realities and rhetoric is what we must do to increase their engagement and help them see the relevance of schooling to everyday life. Critically conscious teachers know how to create critically conscious students who will grow into competent thinkers and actors in society. These 3 main pillars of CRP seem like a tall order, and they are. However, there is much more to being a culturally relevant educator. Culturally relevant teachers are members of the community in which they teach. They know the importance of community and incorporate it into their classrooms. Moreover, culturally relevant educators truly believe that all students can succeed, no matter their race, gender, or socioeconomic class. They are able to set high expectations for students and push those students to meet their expectations. Culturally relevant teachers are able to create a feeling of family and community in their classrooms, where all students feel like they belong and all students know they can be successful. Culturally relevant pedagogy was created more than 30 years ago, but is just as relevant today, if not more so. Many great theorists have since been impacted by CRP and have attempted to build upon its foundation. For example, Paris has created culturally sustaining pedagogy as a way of pushing CRP into the 21st century. According to Ladson Billings, Paris and Elam make an important turn from what people think of as CRP to incorporate the multiplicities of identities and cultures that help formulate today's youth culture. Ladson Billings notes that theories are meant to be fluid, evolving, and forever growing. So culturally relevant pedagogy is a concept that will flow through and influence education for years to come. Another major theme found in the work of Ladson Billings is that of the education debt. Many people talk of the achievement gap found in schools and point to the fact that Black and brown students are on the low end of that gap. However, Ladson Billings reframes this concept. She argues that rather than an achievement gap, what we actually have is an education debt, which comes from other debts owed to the African American community, as well as the communities of other minorities, which is the root cause of the achievement gap. Throughout history, there has been systemic racism, which means racism permeates every system in our country. Therefore, racism and racist policies have played a part in our politics, economics, social systems, and our culture for centuries. In Ladson Billings' words, I am arguing that the historical, economic, sociopolitical, and moral decisions and policies that characterize our society have created an education debt. It is not hard to look at history and discover what Ladson Billings is referring to with this statement. There are multiple components to this which have all contributed to the amassed education debt we see today. Firstly, there is the historical debt. Enslaved people were not permitted an education. When they were freed, they were left to fend for themselves, penniless and uneducated. From the inception of schools for African Americans, they were not given equal time, equal resources, or equal funding. During segregation, African American schools were lucky to get the supplies that white schools no longer needed or wanted. When an entire population begins its educational journey at a stark disadvantage, how can they ever expect to catch up? Secondly, there is the economic debt. According to Ladson Billings, this debt speaks to the persistent underfunding of African American schools that not only began centuries ago, but is also manifest in today's schools. Throughout history and still today, schools are funded differently. Funds determine resources, supplies, the quality of the buildings, the teachers, and the transportation. Thus, the economic debt has directly impacted the education system in place for minorities. Third is the idea of a sociopolitical debt, which, along with the inability to receive an education, was the inability to participate in the self-determination a democratic political process offers. Historically, African Americans have been excluded from the civic process. They had no true legislative representation, and therefore fighting for a quality education was next to impossible as they lacked access to funds and lawyers. While these are not the only components, when all three are taken into consideration together, it is not hard to see where such a large education debt has been accumulated. There are other components to the education debt as well, such as the moral debt, wealth debt, and the healthcare debt. Children at underperforming schools rarely have the same access to health care as their white counterparts. This means there are more health issues and less means to address them. The wealth gap addresses the difference in income and the ability to achieve high wages, as well as the number of minorities living in extreme poverty in this country. Finally, there is a moral debt, which speaks to the lack of morality in the treatment of minorities in this country. Ladson Billings states that the aspects of the debt that reflect the disparities between what we know is right and what we actually do is the moral debt owed to minorities in this country. According to Ladson Billings, when we compare the beautifully written founding documents with how African Americans have been treated in this country, we see a big difference between the Black experience and equality and justice for all. When you take all these factors together, it is no wonder that minority children have struggled in school. In one of her many speeches, Ladson Billings lays out an image of what could be in an American education. Imagine if resources were spread out fairly. Imagine if the best teachers went to the most in-need areas. Imagine what could be possible. We have the expertise and the potential. We must use this to forge a better educational future for our children. The final thing I would like to briefly address is Ladson Billings' idea of a hard reset, which she claims is needed after the events of COVID-19. According to Ladson Billings, we are actually experiencing 4 pandemics: the coronavirus, anti-Black racism, economic collapse, and climate catastrophe. Racial inequities have been exposed severely by the pandemic, and it is time to wipe the slate clean. Getting back to normal is not what we need, as normal is where the problems exist. According to Ladson Billings, the hard reset demanded by the COVID-19 and anti-Black pandemics of 2020 require us to engage in culturally relevant pedagogy that takes into account the conditions of students' lives these occurrences set into motion. Specifically, we must reset around technology, curriculum, pedagogy, assessment, and parent-community engagement that will support and promote students' culture. Students must have access to technology and Wi-Fi even after the pandemic to bring us into the 21st century learning. Curriculum must be rewritten to incorporate culturally relevant ideas. Mental well-being of students must be at the forefront of our plans to promote wellness in our students. Teachers must learn to be culturally responsive in teaching, to meet the needs of all students regardless of race or ethnicity. Finally, parents and communities need to be involved in order to reach all students. According to Ladson Billings, in a reset environment, parents will occupy a central role in teaching and learning. Pulling in all these factors, we can begin to start again so that education is not just best for some, but for all students. The work of Gloria Ladson Billings completely engrossed me. When I think of all I have learned through the study of Ladson Billings' work, I am stunned at what I previously did not know. Why isn't CRP taught in every teacher preparation program? How could I have been teaching for all these years and never been exposed to this body of work? I think of the impact these ideas have had on me and my teaching, and I wonder how Ladson Billings would evaluate my practice. As a tried and true educator, I decided to evaluate my grows and glows. I am guilty of some of the pitfalls that educators have, and I now know where my craft needs work. Black history is only a focus in February in my room. I don't participate in the community enough, and I have definitely been guilty of thinking that some parents are not invested in their child's education. These are the areas of growth for me. On the other hand, I regularly attend the sporting events of my students. I am aware of the cultural differences in my room, and I try to take this into account when dealing with students. And I'm acutely aware of the disparities my students deal with. While some aspects of my teaching are culturally relevant, I have plenty of room for improvement. I am grateful for the knowledge I have gained and fully intend to incorporate it into my practice. Ladson Billings has had a significant and long-lasting impact on me personally and professionally. The significance of the work of Ladson Billings cannot be overstated. Her ideas, theories, and passions have positively influenced education for years and will continue to for years to come. Her ability to articulate and evaluate these issues facing education today bring light to the many areas that require change. She is the Wonder Woman of culturally relevant teaching, and each educator she reaches helps to bridge the gap a little bit.